Hey, 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 it's your girl, your favorite paralegal, aka Cassandra Lynn, and welcome to Legal Doc Talk 24/7. Hey, y'all. So, I'm pretty sure everybody know by now, but Jay-Z has initiated a lawsuit in an Alabama federal court against Tony Buzbee, another attorney. I believe it's another attorney at the firm, but someone at the firm, another staff, let's put it that way, or employee, as well as Jane Doe. And this is the Jane Doe who alleged at the age of 13 she was actually assaulted and raped by Jay-Z and Sean Combs back in September of 2000. And the case has since then been voluntarily dismissed by Jane Doe. And, there was a lot of speculation as to why the case was voluntarily dismissed. And as I stated, this is something that she wanted to do on her own. Now, we will never know exactly why until she would actually come out and say the reason as to why she withdrew her the civil matter against Sean Combs and Diddy. And I think this lawsuit is going to give us a little bit of more a little bit of more clarification as to what happened and why. Now, this is I just pulled it from the press, kind of skimmed through it to ensure that it didn't have any personal information. So I did not read it. So you guys are going to get my raw reaction in regards to this. So without further ado, let's hop right on into this one. As I stated, it's in the Southern District of Alabama. It was actually filed around 5 p.m. this afternoon. I don't know if I think Alabama is Eastern Standard Time. So yeah. Let's see. So plaintiff Sean Corey Carter's complaint and demand for jury trial. And okay, so I'm assuming because, and the reason why it's in federal court, y'all been with me long enough to know, is that each of the defendants are in different states. So you always want to make sure that you file in federal court because the federal court has jurisdiction over citizens that live in different states or countries. But anywho's, let's see, introduction. Okay. A, false. B, malicious. C, strategically and tactically calculated and timed to inflict maximum pain and suffering on Mr. Carter. And D, in conspiracy with multiple attorneys, including defendants Anthony Busby and David Fortney, who, like her, were soulless, motivated by greed and abject disregard of the truth and most fundamental precepts of human decency. These are the only truthful and fair descriptions of Jane Doe's and her lawyers' malevolent efforts to assassinate the impeccable and lifetime earned character of Sean Corey Carter, who is professionally known as Jay Z, but more importantly, is known as a dad and a husband and a son and a human being who did nothing to deserve to or the boy I can't talk nothing to deserve or elicit the wanton depraved attack that Jane Doe in conspiracy with her lawyers launched to extort Mr. Carter beginning on November 5th, 2024 through a menacing private demand letter. I need to post them darn demand letters. I'll get those to you guys. Doe and her lawyers, Anthony Busby, David Fortney, and Anthony G. Busby LP, known as or doing business as the Busby Law Firm, then brought before the world an in court complaint, the impossibility and indeed absurdity of which was surpassed only by its vile malevolence and despite attempt to leverage Mr. Carter into an extortionate payoff, which these malicious actors presented as the only path for Mr. Carter to prevent the public prosecution of the lawsuit by Doe. When their initial extortionate demand letter failed to yield the financial windfall they sought, and after Doe told Busby, with whom she had never spoken before the demand letter was drafted and sent, and that Mr. Carter did not actually assault her, Busby pushed her towards going forward with a false story against Mr. Carter to make the case better and get them, the lawyer and her, more money. Specifically, Buzbee brought Jay-Z into it. All right, let me reread that again. When their initial extortionate extortionate's demand letter failed to yield the financial windfall they sought, and after Doe told Busby, with whom she had never spoken before the demand letter was drafted and sent, that Carter did not actually assault her, Busby pushed her uh, towards going forward with a false story against Mr. Carter to make the case better and get them, the lawyers, and her more money. Specifically, Busby brought Jay-Z into it. Busby then went forward with naming Mr. Carter with full knowledge by him as imparted to him by Doe that Mr. Carter has never assaulted Doe and Doe's entire story as it relates to Mr. Carter was completely fabricated. Doe has now voluntarily admitted directly to representatives of Mr. Carter that the story brought before the world in court and on global television was just that, a false, malicious story. She has admitted to Mr. Carter. She has admitted that Mr. Carter did not assault her, and that indeed it was Busby himself whom she met for the first time at a coffee shop in Houston on the day of her malicious, false NBC News interview, which is discussed in detail below, who pushed her to go forward with false narrative of the assault by Mr. Carter in order to leverage a maximum payday. To compound this rigorous harm, just last Friday, Busby and Fortney's co counsel, a prominent New York attorney, is in the now dismissed false action against Mr. Carter, threatened Mr. Carter's counsel to double down with yet another false public statement by Doe if Mr. Carter publicly revealed her admissions and Busby and Fortney's misdeeds in Mr. Carter's pending California lawsuit against Busby. Fortunately, the clear unexpected from their perspective, Doe, Busby, and Fortney were met with nothing but righteous resolve at every turn by Mr. Carter. He stood steadfast, publicly decried the lies before being put forth against him, and beat this evil conspiracy among malicious Doe and her malevolent, soulless lawyers, driving them back into the shadows from which they came, resulting in the voluntary dismissal with prejudice without settlement of their false and malicious complaint on February 14th, 2025. Mr. Carter does not commence this action lightly. Following Jane Doe's admissions that she fabricated her claims against Mr. Carter, her lawyers have continued to seek to hide this reality, including through further extortionate threats and demands by Busby, Fortney, and their New York counsel on February 28th. Even after all of this, Mr. Carter does not expose his malicious or wrongful accuser's identity in this complaint, seeking to maintain her anonymity as a Doe. But the extortion and abuse of Mr. Carter by Doe and her lawyers must stop. So he is being nice and saying, we're not going to name you, but we know who you are. Therefore, Mr. Carter brings this lawsuit to hold Doe accountable for her willful defamation per se and her malicious prosecution of falsely or knowing false allegations against Mr. Carter that Doe and her co-conspirator attorneys have falsely and maliciously peddled. Alrighty, so let me see. Buzbee Law Firm. So Jane Doe is a citizen of the state of Alabama. Let me see. So Buzbee Law Firm is a law firm that is organized under the laws. Okay, I already know that. No member. Da, 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 da. Okay, so Fortney is part of Busby's crew. All right, so let's see. Allegations. So after hiring the Buzbee Law Firm, Doe falsely accuses Mr. Carter of sexual assault in written correspondence, court filings, and global television. Doe appears to be suffering from personal and financial hardship. She lost custody of her children, and her parents, who, on information and belief, support Doe, recently filed for bankruptcy protection. Despite to obtain a payday, Doe hired the Buzbee Law Firm, which has a long history of whipping up media frenzy with vague and sensational claims against public figures to extort payments from Mr. Carter under the threat of devastating harm to his reputation. All right, so she sought out Buzbee firm. All right. As discussed below, Doe first attempted to extort Mr. Carter through an extortionate demand letter and an anonymous lawsuit, both from Buzbee. When Mr. Carter refused to capitulate to Doe's baseless demands, Doe doubled down by using the justice system to attempt to ruin Mr. Carter by formally naming Mr. Carter in the complaint, making horrific false allegations, and when that also failed, Doe resorted to defaming Mr. Carter on global television. A simple Google or other public record search of Doe by Buzbee and Fortney would have cast doubt on her credibility by revealing that, among other things, A, less than 90 days before sending the demand letter, she had been in court on mental health related issues in connection with her second-degree assault charge and had her bail revoked for failing a drug test. B, she has several mental health disorders and takes multiple medications, according to testimony from her psychiatrist laid bare in public court records. And C, she made three other sexual assault allegations, which were either dropped or dismissed by courts. A. Doe sues Sean Combs entities, and Doe's 1 through 10, alleging that she was sexually assaulted at an after party following the 2000 MTV Video Music Awards. On October 20th, 2024, Doe sued Sean Diddy Combs and his business entities, as well as Doe's 1 through 10, which has been attached to this lawsuit. Although Doe's lawsuit also implicates unnamed Celebrity A and Celebrity B, Doe did not formally name them as parties. Instead, Doe only used Doe's 1 through 10 as defendants. In her original complaint, Doe alleges that when she was 13 years old, a friend dropped her off at Radio City Music Hall in New York City so she could try to attend the VMAs on September 7, 2000. Although she was t- unable to talk her way into the VMAs, a limousine driver purported to work with Combs invited her to an after party. Later that evening, the limousine driver took her to a large white house with a gated U-shaped driveway about 20 minutes away. After accepting a drink, Doe claims that she felt woozy and lightheaded and found that she believed to be an empty room. Doe alleges that Combs and Celebrity A sexually assaulted her while Celebrity B watched. It had become evident that Doe did not initiate this legal action with a legitimate purpose. Instead, the lawsuit was filed with intent to extort Carter. Doe sends Mr. Carter an extortionate letter falsely accusing him of sexual assault. A few weeks after filing her complaint, Doe, through Buzbee, sent Mr. Carter an extortionate letter dating November 5th, 2024, containing false allegations of vile conduct by Mr. Carter. Some of the allegations in Doe's letter were from the public complaint Doe filed against Combs and Doe's 1 through 10, which contained inconsistencies that were later changed when the complaint was amended, with the obvious implication being that she would amend her complaint to add Mr. Carter if he refused to pay. Doe threatened to take a different course if Mr. Carter did not commit to a confidential mediation to resolve the delicate and important matter by the deadline of November 19, 2024, giving Mr. Carter only a 2-week window before she would go public with her false allegations. To avoid both public and criminal exposure, Buzbee stated that his client wants something of substance by way of settlement. However, Doe had already sued Mr. Carter, uh, albeit as one of the Doe's 1 through 10, and Doe's plan was thus clear. She was demanding that Mr. Carter either A, pay something of substance to stop her from making public the wildly false allegations of sexual assault that would subject Mr. Carter to what is that? Opprobrium and irreparable harm, his reputation, family, career, and livelihood, or two, endure that financial and personal ruin. Those statements and correspondence made clear the immediate and extensive threat of exposure if Mr. Carter failed to pay. Doe amends her lawsuit to falsely allege that Mr. Carter sexually assaulted her. Unwilling to capitulate to Doe and Busbee's extortion, on November 18, 2024, Mr. Carter filed a lawsuit against Buzbee for extortion and infliction intentional infliction of emotional distress. Mr. Carter explained that Busbee was shamelessly attempting to extort exorbitant amounts sums from him or else publicly file wildly horrific alleged allegations against him. On December 8, 2024, humiliated by Mr. Carter's lawsuit, Buzbee encouraged Doe to file, and Buzbee and Fortney filed a first amended complaint revealing that Mr. Carter knew all along that one of the Does was a placeholder for Mr. Carter if he did not pay her a ransom. In Doe's first amended complaint, Doe made wild, horrific, and but utterly false allegations against Mr. Carter, substituting him for Celebrity A from the earlier complaint. Doe goes on global television falsely accusing Mr. Carter of sexual assault. On December 13, 2024, NBC News broadcast portions of an exclusive interview of Doe, which was conducted with Fortney by her side. See, that was the question because I'm like, why would Buzbee let her go do a interview? And my question was he there? So now we know that Fortney was by her side. I need to figure out who Fortney is. Uh, NBC News honored Doe's request to mask her identity. NBC News published a story excurting interviews it held with Doe. Excuse me. Okay, that's just the name of the lawsuit. During the interview, which was set up by Buzbee, was given a voluntary basis and in the presence of Fortney, Doe lied about Mr. Carter to a global television audience. In addition to attempting to explain this impossible, how she, a 13-year-old from upstate New York, wound up in Manhattan at a private VMA after party with countless celebrities. Doe told NBC News how she spoke with musicians Benji Madden and his brother at the after party. She recalled talking to Benji Madden about his tattoo of the Last Supper because she has a religious background, so it was something to talk about. Doe repeated her claims that while at the after party, she had a drink that made her feel woozy, after which Mr. Combs and Mr. Carter took turns scraping her, while an unidentified female celebrity watched. Doe told NBC that following the alleged sexual assault, she found her way to a gas station where she called her father, who picked her up and drove her home. She states her father did not ask her what happened, what she did, or where she was. Instead, they rode home in silence for 5 hours and 47 minutes. All of those allegations against Mr. Carter were demonstrably false. Those allegations about Mr. Carter are false and defamatory, and her mendicity, mendicity is clear, including to the reporters at NBC News. First, although Doe stated that the assault occurred at a residence, Mr. Carter was at no such residence. Indeed, NBC News located photos of Mr. Carter from the evening showing him at a party at a commercial location at the now closed Lotus nightclub in New York City. And they attached the article. Of course, a private nightclub cannot be mistaken for a large white residence with a gated U shaped driveway that included a large living room or foyer, a hallway containing several rooms off of it, and a bedroom. Even Buzbee admitted to NBC that Doe does not claim the assault occurred at the Lotus nightclub. Excuse me, drinking some water. All right, second, Doe told NBC that she spent 20 minutes in the limo before arriving at the residence. However, when pressed about these details in a follow up interview with NBC, Doe admitted she did not know where she was going or even how long the drive took. Worse, she conceded to NBC that she guessed about the length of time that the trip had taken in the lawsuit. Third, as to her description of a supposed conversation with Benji Madden during her interview with NBC News, a representative for Madden confirmed to NBC News that neither he nor his brother Joel attended the 2000 VMAs and that they and their good band Good Charlotte were on tour in the Midwest at the time. When confronted with this evidence, she conceded that she made a mistake in identifying them and that not all faces at the after party were clear. Fourth, regarding her long pre drawn drive home with her father, Doe's father told NBC News that he does not recall picking up Doe, which unsurprisingly would have been something that would have definitely sticked in his mind. He said that he learned of the alleged allegation when Doe was interviewed by NBC News in December, and that he did remember once picking her up in the middle of the night, but it was a local drive. Based on their address in Rochester, New York, Doe's father would have driven at least 5 hours and 47 minutes to pick her up. And there are countless other falsehoods in Doe's allegations. For instance, despite alleging that it took 20 minutes to get from Radio City Music Hall to the after party, there are no such houses matching Doe's description within 20 minutes of Radio City Music Hall. And although she implies that Combs hosted the after party, none of the Combs properties match description of the location of the after party. Now, I may not say within 20 minutes, but definitely that 40 Hedge Drive, that man East Hampton's house, that definitely matched the White House with the U-shaped driveway. Um Moreover, Doe alleges that after the VMAs begun, much of a crowd moved inside, but Doe, without a ticket, remained outside with others and watched the VMAs on the Jumbotron. But the broadcast of the VMAs conclusively shows that there was no Jumbotron. Indeed, the producer of the 2000 VMAs and the NYPD confirmed that there were no Jumbotron since their permit application was denied. Even if Doe was outside of the VMAs as she claims, she could not have approached celebrity limousines because they were only outside of the Radio City Music Hall briefly for celebrity pickup and drop off. In any event, the celebrity limousines were separated from fans by the police barricades, as publicly available video of that event clearly shows. And we did see those videos and still images. NBC confronted Doe regarding the substantial contradictory evidence which it had uncovered in less than a week after conducting the initial interview in a follow up phone interview. In response, Doe admitted that she made some mistakes. She also disavowed the allegations in her complaint about the location of the alleged incident and admitted she was just guessing. But Doe did not drop her baseless complaint. She instead insisted on moving forward, including by offering to submit to a polygraph, which never occurred, or in any event has never seen the light of day. Doe waited months before dismissing her false complaint and did so after being lied to by her attorneys for their own benefit. Mr. Carter made several court filings repeatedly detailing the falsity of Doe's claims as revealed by her stories, inconsistencies, and the baselessness of various allegations. At each of these junctures, Doe was confronted with the false nature of her claim as well as the harm it was causing Mr. Carter. At any of these points, Doe could have withdrawn her lawsuit. Nevertheless, Doe continued to pursue her claim without regard to the harm it was causing or could cause Mr. Carter. She has now admitted that Mr. Carter did not assault her. Indeed, Buzbee, aware that Mr. Carter did not assault her, pushed her to make the false claim for money. Having already sent the false and defamatory demand letters, having filed the false and defamatory complaint, and having already set Doe up to give false and defamatory interviews to NBC News, Buzbee, Fortney, and the Buzbee law firm were happy to perpetuate the lies and hold up for unwarranted payment for them and Doe. Indeed, Buzbee went so far as to tell TMZ on December 10th, 2024, already fully aware of the falsity of the allegations, having met with Doe in Houston, that Doe was not ruling out filing rape charges against Mr. Carter, and that what happens next is up to my client. It is clear her case, well, I said it is clear. It's her case, and what she decides to do, you will find out in due course. However, the legal process got into the way of their scheme. Buzbee had signed complaints in the action against Mr. Carter without being admitted to the bar of the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York as required. When the judge presiding over the case was advised of this fact, she issued an order dated January 29th requiring Buzbee to file proof of admission to the Southern District of New York on the docket by February 14th, 2025. The very next day, January 29th, Buzbee applied for such admission. On February 13th, one day before his deadline to file proof of admission in the Southern District of New York, Busby got the news that because he had already filed pleadings in SDNY without being admitted to the bar of that court in the case at issue here and in more than 20 others, his application for admission had been denied. Exhibit. Okay, we got the exhibits. He was also instructed to attach a copy of the now order to any subsequent application for admission in the particular case in the Southern District of New York. Faced with his inability to comply with the judge's order in the case against Mr. Carter and facing the threat of punishment by the court, Busby dispatched Fortney to Alabama to meet with Doe the same day, namely February 13th, 2025. During that meeting, Fortney falsely, maliciously, and manipulatively told Doe that the case against Mr. Carter needed to be dismissed as Mr. Carter had made threats against Doe's life and it was too dangerous to continue with the case. Of course, no such threats had ever been made. Rather, Busby and Fortney were desperate to withdraw the false case of face punishment in the court for their actions in filing a false pleading without Busby even being admitted in the Southern District of New York, jeopardizing their ability to continue with more than 20 other cases they had pending in Southern District of New York. Thus, on the evening of Friday, February 14th, 2025, Valentine's Day, Doe quietly filed her voluntary dismissal with prejudice. But the threats and extortion did not end with the dismissal of Doe's fraudulent lawsuit. Rather, on Friday, February 28th, that was this past Friday, after Doe admitted all of the foregoing and after Busby became aware of those admissions, a prominent New York attorney serving as Busby's and Fortney's co-counsel called an attorney for Mr. Carter. During that call, Busby and Fortney's New York co-counsel threatened that if Mr. Carter's attorneys filed anything in Mr. Carter's pending extortion and defamation case in California against Busby related to the statements made by Doe, fully exculpating Mr. Carter and inculpating her and and Busby for extortion and conspiracy, that Busby would issue a public statement by Doe that she, one, was being harassed by Mr. Carter's people since she dropped the lawsuit, and two, dropped the lawsuit only because she was afraid of her life, and that the allegations against Mr. Carter in the dropped lawsuit were all true. Now, we have really discussed co counsel, and the co counsel is the Curtis Law Firm. This lady right here. Hold on, let me pull and Antigone, because she is the one. Antigone. Because as I stated to you guys, Antigone, like when Buzbee files the pleadings, he doesn't file under his Pacer account. He files under this firm. This lady here, Antigone Curis. This lady here. So I'm assuming that I think now this is the only law firm that I've seen so far with all of the cases where they're filing under her Pacer account. So they said that co-counsel threatened that if Mr. Carter filed anything, that they gonna put out a statement saying that Doe was being harassed and that the lawsuit was dropped because she was afraid for her life. Lord. Of course, Doe allegations about being harassed by Mr. Carter's people since she dropped the lawsuit and about her reasons for dropping the lawsuit are and always were false. When Doe, Buzbee, and Fortney and their New York co-counsel said they knew or could readily have discovered through any reasonable inquiry that the statements were false. Thus, the threats of extortion and further defamation continue to this day, necessitating that Mr. Carter take action to prevent unscrupulous actors from further preying on him. So, why did she say, let me see? Okay, so it's saying that she dropped the lawsuit because she was afraid of her life. That was the allegations. Okay, so malicious prosecution against all of them. So for let me see. So for alleging that they committed alleging that they committed heinous crimes, defendant did not initiate the lawsuit with a legitimate purpose. Instead, the lawsuit was filed with the intent to extort Mr. Carter. And they are going to talk about the demand letter that stated pretty much what happened. I wonder if well, no, because this is not about John Doe. This is about Jane Doe. I've always said, at the end of the day, we side with the plaintiff until otherwise. I treat it just like as any other case. If we start investigating and we find out that you're lying, then we can't do anything about it. You're going to need a defense attorney. Um, let's see. I'm gonna go there. I'm gonna just read it. On November 5th, 2024, Doe, through her attorney Buzbee, sent Mr. Carter an extortionate letter threatening to publicly assert wild, horrific, but utterly false allegations that Mr. Carter actually assaulted a minor after the VMAs in 2000. According to Doe, if Carter wished to avoid the financial and personal devastation that such public allegations would inflict, he would need to work out a deal to silence her. But both had already sued Mr. Carter because he was included in Doe's 1 through 10. Defendant thus filed a lawsuit to force Mr. Carter into either paying something of substance to stop her from making public the wildly false allegations of the actual assault that would subject Mr. Carter to opprobrium and irreparable harm, his reputation, family, career, and livelihood, or to endure the financial and personal ruin. Um, Okay, going on to the news and other platforms to further decimate her false statements. All right, they're talking about the inconsistencies that NBC pretty much discovered or uncovered. So all of that would be considered malicious. What is this cause? Malicious prosecution. The second cause of action was the abuse of the process. Um, let me see. So going on to the demand letter. So after Mr. Carter refused to cultivate to the demand letters through Buzbee Fortney and the Buzbee law firm made good on her threat and formally named him as a defendant in the lawsuit she filed weeks earlier. Defendant either knew that the statements against Mr. Carter were false. She acted with reckless disregard for the truth when initiating proceedings against Mr. Carter. They talk about, all right, so it's repeating itself. Defendant's initiation and continued prosecution of the frivolous lawsuit was willful and malicious and was intended to oppress and cause injury to Mr. Carter. And accordingly, Mr. Carter is entitled to an award of punitive damages. I'm pretty sure under the first cause of action as well. Civil conspiracy. Defendants agreed and worked together and knowingly and willfully conspired to maliciously prosecute and abuse the legal process against Mr. Carter. The defendants agreed to initiate and continue the false and malicious lawsuit in the shared objective of extorting Mr. Carter through false and damaging accusations, thereby causing harm to the reputation and financial well being. In doing so, all defendants intended to harm Mr. Carter. Excuse me. One or more of those defendants took an overt act or acts to achieve malicious prosecution of Mr. Carter and to abuse the process of the courts against Mr. Carter. Defendant Buzbee, as Doe's attorney, filed the initial lawsuit against Mr. Carter and other entities, knowing the claims were fabricated or recklessly disregard for the truth that the claims were fabricated. Defendant Fortney, as an attorney representing Doe, assisted in pursuing the lawsuit and was complicit in the unlawful purposes of extorting Mr. Carter. Defendant Buzbee and Fortney continued to prosecute the meritless lawsuit even after each confronted with further evidence in its falsity, demonstrating their collective intent to harm Mr. Carter, and defendant Doe actively participated in the formulation of and prosecution of false claims against Mr. Carter. My only question here is why not include local counsel who actually filed it? Tony Buzbee signed it, but since he's not admitted in the Southern District of New York, he has no way to go into Pacer and actually file the petition or any pleading for that manner. It would have to be done through, and I said it would have to be. It was done through Antigone. I keep saying her name wrong. Antigone Curris. So her Pacer account was used. So why not include them also? Because you did say that local counsel also called and threatened you. I would have included them in the lawsuit. The conduct of these defendants caused Mr. Carter harm. The collective conduct, including their malicious prosecution and abuse of the process, was intentional and calculated to cause Mr. Carter injury. Their conspiracy was executed to extort money from Mr. Carter and to damage his personal and professional and business reputation. As a direct result of defendant's conspiracy, Mr. Carter suffered substantial harm. Mr. Carter also suffered out of pocket expenses and emotional distress. Defamatory against Doe. Doe has made false and defamatory statements to and through third parties, including but not limited to major media outlets and through her attorney Buzbee, on social media platforms and during public interviews accusing Mr. Carter of raping her. These statements were widely disseminated to the general public through media outlets, social media platforms, and during public interviews. Notwithstanding the falsity of her allegations, Doe relied on NBC and other sources to republish and further decimate her defamatory statements about Mr. Carter to the public, despite knowing that providing such statements to media outlets would decimate her false statements about Mr. Carter throughout the country and the world to millions of viewers and readers, which is what they did on December 13th, 2024. Those accusations were neither speculative nor I'm not even going to butcher that word, but asserted by Doe as matter of fact to lead a reader or viewer to conclude that Mr. Carter committed the criminal acts she alleged. Doe knowingly made her false statements at a minimum, made them with a reckless disregard as to their falsity of, as demonstrated by NBC ability to quickly uncover inconsistencies in Doe's allegations and contradictory evidence. Worse, when pressed about the inconsistencies, she admitted her statements contained mistakes and random guesses as to the key details. Doe thus acted with actual malice when she knowingly and intentionally published false allegations accusing Mr. Carter of sexual assault. Doe's false statements and her devised plan to use media networks such as NBC News to decimate the statements to millions were a part of Doe's calculated plan to falsely accuse Mr. Carter of sexual assault and inflict maximum reputational harm to him to induce payment. Those false statements are defamatory per se, as inflammatory statements falsely accuse Mr. Carter of crimes of moral turpitude that subject Mr. Carter to disgrace, ridicule, public hatred, and contempt. Mr. Carter was directly injured by those false statements and faced the deterioration of his public image, reputation, professional relationships, and business opportunities due to the public contempt and hatred caused by those false statements. Defendant's false statements also constitute defamation per quad. Those false statements were made as a matter of fact statements which were reasonably understood to have been made by Mr. Carter. Those false statements to social media networks, including her NBC News interview, implicated Mr. Carter in allegations of criminal sexual misconduct. The statements made by Doe were known to millions of readers and viewers of those statements, which injured Mr. Carter in his occupation as a performer and business person. For example, Doe's false statements and actions undermine Mr. Carter's ability to maintain professional relationships, secure business opportunities, and preserve his reputation by exposing Mr. Carter to disgrace, ridicule, public hatred, and contempt. Mr. Carter has suffered assumed and actual damages, including but not limited to loss and injury to his business, harm to his name and reputation, out of pocket loss, emotional harm, humiliation, and embarrassment. Those false statements were a substantial factor in causing Mr. Carter's harm. Doe acted with constitutional malice. Doe either knew that her statements against Mr. Carter were false or acted with reckless disregard for the truth. Even upon sufficient grounds to withdraw her false statements against Mr. Carter with the release of the NBC News article, Doe continued to threaten, through her attorney, Anthony Buzbee, criminal prosecution against Mr. Carter and maintain the lawsuit against Mr. Carter. Doe did not have any reasonable ground to support any truth in her statements and acted with reckless disregard for the truth. In fact, she recanted portions of her complaint when when interviewed by NBC News and when asked by representative of Mr. Carter to come forward with the truth, she responded, "What's in it for me?" Wait, what? In fact, she recanted portions of her complaint when interviewed by NBC News. And when asked by a representative of Carter to come forward with the truth, she responded, "What's in it for me? Lord child." Wherefore, Sean Corey Carter respectfully prays for judgment and relief against Jane Doe to all causes of action, and Anthony Buzbee, David Forney, and Anthony G. Buzbee LP, doing business as the Buzbee Law Firm, as to the first, second, and third causes of action as follows. An award assumed in actual damages in an amount to be determined by the finder of fact, an award of punitive damages, reasonable costs and legal fees pursuant to applicable law, pre and post judgment interest as applicable, and any other relief the court deems just and appropriate. He is asking for a jury trial as well. Um, Now, people are going to question as to why sue against Jane Doe, knowing that she is not right and she is, going through difficult times, and more than likely she's probably not going to have the money, right? It is all about the principle of the matter. Now, y'all know how I am about Tony Buzbee. Y'all know how I am about Buzbee. But I've said it though. I am disappointed that he didn't do what he was supposed to do as far as, you know, registering or gaining admission to the Southern District of New York. Now, as far as I don't from my point of view, on the legal side, it's like I'm 50-50. I can see because there are some law firms out there that are just about money and the notoriety. There we go. Um, and then there's some firms that legitimately want to actually help victims. I'm stuck in between the two because, like I said, Tony Buzbee is a great lawyer based off the cases that I have read. I have seen his work, but I do admit that this is sloppy. Now, I am going to sit back on this one to see how it plays out because my wheels are turning. but something just does not sound right with this particular lawsuit. And that's just my opinion. So I'm going to sit back in the cut and I'm going to see how this unfolds. Um yeah, I mean that's all I can do. That is all I can do. Um he oh, also, he did file a motion to leave in order for Jane Doe to continue under the pseudonym. Um And it reads, I'm just going to kind of read. It says Plaintiff Sean Corey Carter moves the court for leave to use a pseudonym to proceed against defendant Jane Doe and further support. Mr. Carter states the following. Mr. Carter brings this lawsuit against Jane Doe to hold Doe accountable for false allegations of sexual assault that she made against Mr. Carter and extortionate demands made in a conspiracy with her attorneys on an ongoing basis. Mr. Carter does not commence this action lightly. Following Jane Doe's admissions that she fabricated her claims against Mr. Carter, her lawyers have continued to seek to hide this reality, including through further extortionate threats and demands by Buzbee, Fortney, and their New York co-counsel on February 28th. Even after all of this, Mr. Carter does not wish to expose his malicious and wrongful accuser's identity in his complaint and seeks to maintain her anonymity as Doe. But the extortion and abuse of Mr. Carter by Doe and her lawyers must stop. Okay. We ain't got to do all of that because it's just saying the same darn thing. All right. So he's being fair and he's like, okay, I'm going to continue to let you, well, he's asking the court for them to continue to let her use Jane Doe to proceed under that pseudonym. Now, I have a lot of questions. I have a lot of questions. And like I said, I have to sit back and I have to look at this because I'm thinking of the John Doe letter. Like, I see that you filed a lawsuit against Jane Doe. And furthermore, I see that you did investigation to find out who Jane Doe was. Did you do that same investigation to see who John Doe was? Because it's like, okay, is he real? And you said, okay, just forget about it. We're not going to pursue that because you find out it's a make believe person, or is the person real? Like that's the thing, because I'm analyzing these pleadings. It's and I understand what Jane Doe did, and definitely, if she lied, that is defamation. And if Tony Buzbee did indeed, push her to continue with something that she didn't want to continue with, that's another thing. But I'm still going back. If you're going to sue, you should have included John Doe as well. Because I think, not saying that her story is, worse or not as worse as John Doe's story, but that's really defamatory. So I think if you're going to go after Buzbee, that you're going to go after Buzbee for both of those demand letters because they both had an equal play in it. Even though Jane Doe did go as far as filing the lawsuit and going through all of this. So I have a lot of questions in my head. I can't make my decision because I don't trust some of the things that have been said, only because I have seen it in another lawsuit. So I'm going to sit back and I'm going to watch how this plays out. But if she lied, then this lawsuit is rightfully brought upon her. If Buzbee forced her to continue with a false story, then he gets what he gets towards him. But I'm going to sit back in the cut and I'm going to see how this plays out because I have a lot of questions. Y'all let me know what y'all think about this in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Until then, you all be blessed and I'm out. Bye.